I remember the scent of my father's chambers in those last days, a thick mixture of frankincense, sweat, and decay. The windows were kept shut. The priests murmured day and night, but I stayed. I held his hand when he couldn't speak anymore. I wiped the blood from his lips when it came up with his coughs. I whispered, "You'll get better, Father." He didn't. On the 7th day, King Robert II of France died. The entire palace seemed to inhale and then hold its breath. I was 16. My brother Robert, the golden boy of court, was just 14. But already the whispers started. Not of mourning, but of succession. And my mother, Queen Constance, her grief lasted less than a morning. The court flooded with power-hungry faces. Dukes, bishops, stewards with pinched expressions, and scribes scribbling down nothing that mattered. But they all looked to her, Constance of Arles. Born of Provençal blood and ambition, she moved through those halls like a queen who had never been a wife. One evening, I passed her chambers. The door was cracked. I heard voices. One of them was hers. "He was never meant to rule," she whispered. "He's not strong enough. The crown will only break him." I thought she was speaking of Robert, but then came the next words. "We must act quickly, before Henry believes it's his." My breath caught in my chest. I pressed against the stone wall. "Robert is young," came another voice. "Father Odilo of Cluny. The nobles expect Henry." There was a silence. Then Constance answered, cold as a blade drawn in candlelight. "Then we make them expect Robert." What does a son do when he learns his own mother is plotting against him? At first, I did nothing, not out of fear, out of disbelief. In the days after the king's death, nobles came to me in secret, some offering loyalty, others asking where I stood. I stood with my father's dying breath. I stood with tradition. The eldest son inherits. But tradition bends when the queen whispers hard enough. On the night before the council at Reims, I met her alone in the chapel. No guards, no priests, just a mother and son, and 100 unspoken wounds between us. "Do you hate me so much?" I asked. Her eyes didn't blink. "No, I simply believe France needs a king who inspires love, not pity." I flinched. She stepped closer. "You remind me too much of your father, weak, sentimental, always hoping men will do right instead of making them." "I was there when he died," I whispered. "And that," she said, "is the only reason you have a claim at all." Later that night, I tore the royal signet from my neck and stared at it by firelight. My father's seal. My birthright. I did not sleep. I did not pray. I waited. The next morning, I entered the great hall where the nobles were gathered for the council. The Archbishop of Reims opened the session with prayer. Then, silence. Constance stood. She placed a hand on young Robert's shoulder. "My lords," she said, "France grieves, but it must not crumble. I present to you a son raised for kingship." I did not rise, I did not speak. I looked into their faces, some startled, some wary, and others already convinced. Then, Bishop Ludovald, one of my father's oldest allies, stood slowly. "No," he said, "the king's will was spoken before God. His heir is Henry." A murmur went through the hall. My brother turned toward me with confusion, and something darker behind his eyes. And that's when I understood. He didn't know, Robert had no idea he was being used. But he liked the taste of it. And I realized something else, something colder than my mother's betrayal. My enemy wasn't just her, it was him. That night, a courier arrived at my chamber. A sealed letter. No signature. I opened it. Just one line, written in a hand I recognized. "If you wish to live, do not go to Reims tomorrow." I was crowned king, and in that moment, I knew I had no one. The cathedral at Reims was colder than I remembered, the kind of cold that creeps into bone, no matter how many robes you wear. My breath fogged as I stepped toward the altar. Every eye followed me. Not with awe, not with pride, with calculation, with doubt. Archbishop Amar spoke the words, ancient and ironclad. Do you, Henry, accept the crown of France, and swear to defend the Church, serve the people, and guard the realm? I do, I said. And yet, in my heart, do I? I felt the weight of the crown as it settled on my brow, not heavy with gold, but with silence. No cheers, no joy, just duty, just judgment. The ceremony was swift, too swift. There was no procession, no ringing of bells, no feast, only hurried blessings and glances exchanged behind raised goblets. I saw it then. They weren't crowning me. They were testing me, buying time. My mother didn't attend. Neither did Robert. In the council chamber afterward, the nobles sat like statues. Faces I had known since childhood now looked at me as if I were a foreign king. I cleared my throat. We will need to secure the borders of Normandy and send envoys to the emperor to— I believe the people would prefer to hear from Robert, interrupted Count Vermandois. I blinked. He smiled thinly, as if offering me a favor. He has the heart of the common folk. Your father loved both sons. Perhaps the realm could benefit from his counsel. The others nodded. I looked down at the table. There, someone had placed a scroll, half unrolled. A petition. Dozens of seals. They were preparing to invite Robert to be king instead. And they hadn't even waited a day. That night, I walked the halls alone. The servants bowed, lower than usual. The guards stood stiff, but none met my eye. In the chapel, I knelt before the cross not to pray, but to listen. To the silence, to the empty air where my father used to walk, to the knowledge that I had been crowned not because I was wanted, but because I was necessary. I found Bishop Ludovald alone, warming his hands at a brazier. "Why did you support me?" I asked. He looked up, weary. "Because your brother is beloved, and loved princes are dangerous." He paused. "And because you don't crave power. That may be the only reason you can wield it." I sat beside him. "Then why does it feel like I've already lost?" "Because you thought the crown meant victory." He turned toward me. "It doesn't. It means you've been chosen to lose again and again, and still remain standing." At a feast the next day, meant to celebrate the coronation, someone raised a toast. "To Robert, the people's favorite." There was laughter. Not cruel, not loud, but enough. Enough to strip me bare in front of everyone. I said nothing. I smiled faintly. But I saw the way the Queen Mother looked away, and how Robert, sitting beside her, flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and pride. Later, a servant slipped me a note, no signature. Just 3 words, hastily written, "They are meeting." He knew exactly how to hurt me, because once he loved me. The meeting was held in secret, a gathering of nobles near Meaux. I sent spies. They returned with names, familiar names. Names from childhood feast tables. Names of men who used to ruffle Robert's hair and pat my back with equal warmth. Now they whispered treason. They were preparing to crown my brother. And yet, I hesitated. I could have raised arms, summoned loyalists, declared war. But I didn't. Because I remembered. A sunlit courtyard. 2 boys with wooden swords, laughing, tumbling, bleeding from scraped knuckles. One called the other brother, and meant it. So I rode north. Just 3 companions, no guards, no banners. Only the seal of a king, and the ache of a brother trying one last time. Robert met me in the hunting lodge of Crépy. He looked older than the boy I remembered, shoulders squared, eyes colder. But he smiled. That same tilted smile he'd always had. "Majesty," he said with mock courtesy, bowing low, "to what do I owe the honor?" I stepped forward. "To stop this madness before it becomes war," he poured wine. "I didn't summon armies, Henry. They came to me." "Because you let them." He raised an eyebrow. "Because you failed to keep them." We sat across from each other, fire crackling, shadows moving across our faces. "Do you remember Father's last words?" I asked. He sipped slowly. "I remember yours." I frowned. "You said, We'll carry this crown together. A pause. Then you took it alone. I blinked. You weren't ready. And you were? The question stung, not because it wasn't true, but because it was. Robert leaned forward, voice low, almost tender. You were always father's heir, but you were never mother's son. And yet, I said, I'm the one wearing the crown. He smiled, not with joy, with challenge. For now. We didn't argue further. We didn't embrace. We parted with nods and unspoken things. I left a gift behind. A dagger of our father's, one he'd always admired. When my men returned to retrieve it, it had been left on the steps, buried in the mud. The next day, I sent an envoy, Count Gerard, a loyal man, to negotiate a truce. He didn't return. 3 days later, his horse staggered back to the gate at Sens. Gerard was tied across its back. Alive. Barely. Beaten. Unconscious. And in his hand, clenched like a death grip, was a ribbon. Red. Silk. From Robert's cloak. I stared at it long into the night, then said, to no one, so it begins. I was king in name. In truth, I was a fugitive. Paris fell on a gray morning. I watched from the northern hilltops as my own banners were lowered. The people inside the walls didn't resist. They didn't rally. They simply opened the gates to Robert, and why wouldn't they? He brought smiles, promises, bread. I had brought silence and taxes. The nobles turned like birds, sensing the storm's new direction. One by one, the names I had once counted as friends stopped answering my messengers. Some sent letters of apology. Others sent nothing at all. The court scattered. The throne at Senlis stood empty. I rode with only 7 men. By winter's breath, we were down to 3. We hid in estates barely worthy of the word. Barns. Abbots. Cellars. Once, in the loft of a village mill, I slept beside the sacks of wheat, my crown wrapped in a torn cloak, buried under straw. And yet, even there, word of me passed from mouth to mouth. The fallen king. The wandering shadow. One night, we found shelter in a woodsman's hut. He didn't recognize me, gave us bread and boiled turnips, said nothing when I offered a coin. I asked his wife if they feared war. She laughed bitterly. We fear wolves more. At least they don't charge taxes. I wrote a letter to my mother. A single page. Do you still see me as your son? I stared at the ink until it dried. Then I burned it in the hearth. My men, what remained of them, sat in silence, eating in the barn. Rain tapped at the roof. One asked, "Will you go to Normandy? They might shelter you." "No," I said. "They'll take me in and keep me there." Another, "You still have allies in Lyon. The bishop there. They want a king with power, not a beggar with a crown." They looked at me with something approaching pity. That was when I stood. I would have given up the crown, I said, just to hear her say she was proud of me. No one spoke after that. For days we moved without direction. We avoided roads, traveled by night. I no longer sought safety, only a place to disappear. But one night, as we sheltered in a half-collapsed stable outside Poissy, a knock came at the barn door. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. We reached for swords. "Who's there?" one of my men shouted. So today, we dive into the tragic reign of Henry I, a king born for the crown, yet betrayed by those closest to him. But before we move on, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more cinematic stories of betrayal, power, and real history. After that, leave a comment and tell us, what would you have done in Henry's place? Surrendered or fought back? All right, ready to meet the king who ruled not with fire, but with silence? So one night, as we sheltered in a half-collapsed stable outside Poissy, A knock came at the barn door. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. We reached for swords. "Who's there?" one of my men shouted. A voice answered, "Not a friend, but not an enemy, and I bring news of a death." The man at the door was soaked through with rain. Mud streaked up his boots, his cloak frayed. But he carried a seal. A black ribbon, the mark of mourning. "Your brother," he said, "is dead." Robert had died in Melun. Fever, sudden and brutal. Some said poison. Others said the saints themselves had rejected him. I sat in silence after the news. Not relief, not grief, just the quiet turning of the world. Constance forbade me from attending the funeral. I traveled anyway. At the gates of the chapel, guards blocked the entrance. I didn't draw my sword. I simply stood there, in the rain, as the bells tolled inside. My mother emerged. She didn't meet my eye. "If you have come to claim him," she said, "you are too late," I whispered. "He was my brother. You made him your enemy." "No," I said. "You made us both." She walked past me, her veil soaked, her expression unreadable. I never saw her again. France had no king. Robert had been the people's prince, the noble's puppet. But with him gone, the factions splintered. No one wanted a war, but no one wanted me either. I still wore the crown, but now I wore it in the dark. It was Bishop Anselm who found me. He came alone, cloaked, through a snowstorm, to the abbey where I was hiding. "I bring more than God's word," he said. "I bring opportunity." We sat in the cloisters. The snow drifted between the arches. "Paris is leaderless," Anselm said, "but no one wants the old struggle. The people are tired, the nobles cautious." "And what do you want?" He smiled faintly. "I want a king who owes the church." He laid out the offer. Public alliance. In return, I would grant privileges, tax exemptions, lands, positions of influence. A devil's bargain dressed in robes. But what choice did I have? I agreed, and the church anointed me. Again, not with oil, with power. I rode back to Paris not with armies, but with bishops. Cathedrals rang bells in my name. Monks copied letters of support. The people, hearing the name Henry once more, did not cheer, but they bowed. Because God had spoken. That night, Bishop Anselm placed a hand on my shoulder. "You are king again," he said. I turned to him. "At what price?" He said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. My brother was dead. The war was over. But I still wasn't home. The bells of Notre Dame rang for my return. They echoed across the rooftops like a promise. But it was a promise no one believed in. I passed through the gates of Paris with banners raised, crowds silent. They didn't cheer. They didn't boo. They simply watched, as if to say, "You again." I was king, undisputed, unchallenged, and utterly alone. The palace was dustier than I remembered. My name was carved into the throne's armrest, but the chamber felt colder than the barns where I'd once slept. At court, the nobles bowed. Some even smiled. But there was no warmth. Just necessity. I heard them whisper, "He's back. But for how long?" I tried to speak with my mother once. Word came that she was ill, kept to her chambers, draped in silence and incense. I went. The guards let me pass without a word. Her chamber was lit only by a single candle. The windows shuttered. The air smelled of lavender and damp pages. She sat in a high-backed chair, unmoving. I stood in the doorway. "Robert is gone," I said softly, "and I am still here." She didn't turn her head. "If your brother were alive," she said, "this kingdom would be whole." I waited. No further words came. I left without another. My eyes were full, but my face remained unbroken. In the palace courtyard that evening, I watched children playing. Sons of servants, chasing each other with wooden sticks. One wore a crown made of hay. I turned to Bishop Anselm, who stood nearby. "Do they know who I am?" He hesitated. "They know what you wear," I nodded, "but not who I am." "No," he said, "not yet." And so, I ruled. I held court. I issued edicts. I met with abbots, with knights, with tax collectors, who could not meet my gaze. I signed parchments with my seal. But every time the wax cooled, I wondered if anyone would obey it. A week after my return, a rider arrived from the east. He carried a scroll sealed with a golden sun. I broke it open. Inside, a proposal. A marriage. A princess from a distant city. Kiev. Her name was Anne, and she was unlike any woman I had ever met. She came from a world I didn't know, and became the only person who truly saw me. They said she would be quiet, obedient, foreign. A princess from the east, born of snow and incense, meant to soothe the crown, breed an heir, and disappear behind veils. They were wrong. Anne of Kiev arrived at dusk, riding not in a litter, but on horseback. Her cloak was fur-lined, her hair pinned like braided gold. She dismounted herself and met me with eyes like mirrors. She bowed. I bowed lower. Our wedding was short. No pomp, no fanfare. Just holy words and cold stone and vows spoken by two people who barely knew each other. That night, we dined alone. She asked no questions. She made no demands. She simply said, "Do you know what kind of man you are?" I blinked. "A tired one." She smiled. "Good. Tired men tend to listen." Over the weeks, I learned her silences were not submission, but study. She watched everyone, understood everything, and she began to speak. Softly at first, then boldly. "The nobles don't respect you because you walk like a guest in your own court," she told me one evening. "So I should shout more?" I asked. "No," she said. "You should stay longer. Let them get used to your silence." She read Latin better than most of my bishops. She wrote letters with a clarity that stunned my scribes. She asked about the roads, the harvests, the monasteries. And when I asked her why, "Because if they ever love you," she said, "it will not be for your name. It will be for your effort." And then, in spring, she placed my hand on her belly and said, "He is yours." The night Philip was born, it rained for hours. The midwives whispered prayers. I stood in the corridor, hands bloodless from clenching. Then the cry. I rushed in. Anne was pale, sweating, her hair damp and wild, but she was smiling. She held the child out to me. "He is whole," she said. I took him, small, soft, furious. I held him to my chest, and I broke. She whispered, "You were alone. He won't be." And I said, "You'll never be the second choice. You're my choice." We didn't speak of my mother. We didn't need to. That night, as the fire dimmed and the nurses slept, I stood over the cradle. I watched him breathe, and I made a vow. You will not grow up learning to hide your pain. I didn't know if I could keep it. But for the first time, I wanted to. I spent my youth proving I was king. Now I must teach my son not to need to. Philip learned to walk between council benches. He clutched scrolls like toys, called my guards by name. Once, during a sermon, he asked the bishop why God liked kings more than bakers. The bishop sputtered. Anne laughed. So did I. He was curious, fearless, but I saw in him the same fire that had burned in Robert, and I feared it. Anne noticed my distance. "You flinch when he's loud," she said once. "You go still when he disobeys." I turned away. "I don't want him to become soft." "No," she said gently. "You don't want him to become you." That cut deeper than I admitted. One night, Philip found me alone in the chapel, kneeling in front of the crucifix, crown set aside. He sat beside me, cross-legged. "I spilled the ink," he said. "In the scribe's room." I nodded. "They said I'll be whipped." I looked at him. "Do you know why?" "Because kings must learn control." "No," I said, "because kings must learn the weight of mistakes." He was quiet, then asked, "Did your father whip you?" "No," I said, "but he let others do it." Silence. Then he whispered, "Will you?" I stared at the candle's flame and said, "No, but you will clean the floors until they shine. With your hands. Not your name." He smiled. "That's better." And I realized, he didn't fear me. He trusted me. Later, Anne said to me, "He doesn't need your pain. He needs your presence." And so I started to walk with him more, talk less, listen better. When he cried, I stayed. When he shouted, I waited. When he asked questions I couldn't answer, I told him so. I gave him a wooden sword when he was 9. "Is this to fight enemies?" he asked. "No," I said. "It's to protect people who can't." One afternoon, Philip struck a stable boy. The boy had stepped in his way. It was quick, petty, reflexive. I arrived before the servants could intervene. Philip froze when he saw me. His lip trembled. "I didn't mean." I raised my hand. "Not to strike, just to silence." Then I said, "And now I learn if you are truly my son." The rebellion started in Anjou, like a fire catching on old wood. It wasn't large, but it was sharp. A count declared himself sovereign. A few lords joined. Old banners were dusted off. Mercenaries crossed rivers at night. In the old days, I might have ridden out, sword high. Instead, I waited and sent letters, not threats, questions. To the Count of Anjou, "If your people bleed, who will till your fields?" To the Duke of Aquitaine, "If France fractures, who holds the border against the empire?" To Normandy, "If I fall, do you trust the next king more than me?" The letters worked, not immediately, but slowly. Like snow melting under sun, I offered amnesty instead of vengeance, borders instead of chains. I let them keep their pride, and that, more than taxes, kept them loyal. Some said I was weak, others said I was wise. But what mattered was this: there was no war. One evening, I stood on the ramparts of Compiègne with Count Vermandois, an old rival who had once toasted to Robert's crown. He looked over the fields and said, "When we backed your brother, we thought you'd vanish. And yet," I said, "here I stand." He turned. "You were the king none of us wanted, but you were the king we needed." He bowed, properly, for the first time. I didn't smile, but inside, something loosened. Anne found me reading by the hearth that night. "No rebellions today?" she teased. "Only in my knees," I said, rubbing them. She sat beside me. "You've built peace," I nodded. "And now I must teach him how to keep it." I summoned Philip. We walked through the market square, watched bakers, weavers, blacksmiths. "This," I said, "is your kingdom?" He frowned. "Not the castle?" "No. That's just the place where decisions echo. But this is where they land." Later that night, as I bent to kiss Anne's hand, my fingers trembled. I tried to hide it. She noticed, said nothing, but held my hand longer than usual. And in that moment, I knew. Time was beginning to close its hand around me. The pain came like a whisper, then like a storm. One morning, I could no longer stand without help. The next, I could no longer write my own name. The physicians called it fever, but I knew it was simply time. Anne never wept in front of me. She sat by the window, weaving as if the thread might hold back the end. Philip stood taller now, his eyes older than his years. He knelt beside my bed. I placed my hand on his, not firm, not kingly, just a father's touch. "My son," I said, "I was not born for this crown." It was pressed into my hands like a blade, sharp, unwanted, but necessary. He watched, silent. "I've worn it, bled under it, survived it, and I've built it into something you can carry." I pulled the signet from my finger. "Not to bind you, to remind you." He nodded, but I saw the tears. So I said what I had longed to hear my whole life. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You just have to be present. The rest the crown will teach you. Anne came beside me, took my other hand. We didn't speak of Robert, or Constance, or what might have been, only what was. Us. This. Now. I was not the king she wanted, but I became the king this country needed. And now, my son will rule, without ever doubting that he belongs. Thanks for watching. Did this story move you? At what moment did you truly feel Henry's pain? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And while you're here, don't miss more powerful stories from this unforgettable dynasty.